Hello everybody, in this video we will fetch product categories data from Magento backend and we will use GraphQL API for this. And to do it we will use Apollo Client. Let's go to documentation, get started. First of all we need to install dependency. Yarn add, and we also need to create a client. Just copy the snippet, and for React we can use Apollo provider, so let's import it. And we will need to wrap it around our navigation. Okay, let's do a small refactor and move our client in separate directory. We'll call it Apollo and create new file, client. Let's export and call it Apollo Client. Apollo Client automatically imported. Remove unnecessary dependency. We see some errors. I think it's flow server is broken. Oh, it's complain because we have strict mode here. Let's remove strict mode. Next we need to provide our GraphQL URL. So let's create config for this file just in root. Let's name it Magento config JS. Export const Magento config. It will be an object, and let's add URL field. And for URL let's use this sample. It's documentation of Magento PVA Studio project. So this is basically some cloud instance, and we can use it. Okay, we don't need this, and this is basic Magento URL. Let's use it in our client. And to use GraphQL API, it should be GraphQL as endpoint to the base URL. Okay, we're done with Apollo Client setup, and next we can try to fetch data. So let's go to the category screen. I think it's place where we want to invoke our fetch. Let's create a hook for this. Logic categories directory. Let's create use categories hook, and let's check docs. We want to use a lazy query, and we need query. So let's try first the query in the Altair Chrome plugin. It connects to our basic URL and GraphQL and the end. Send request, and we can see docs here. Let's check query, and we want to use category list. So let's start to build our query. Category list. It uses filters as a params. Let's check. Okay, we will use IDs. And IDs equal string, let's say 2. Usually Magento use default root category with ID 2, and let's pass fields we want to fetch. Okay, I want ID, and let's test. Yeah, it's fetched ID, but actually we don't need default category. We're more interested in children, and children also let's fetch ID and name. Let's check. Yes, works correctly. And maybe also let's fetch product count and children count. I think in future we won't show categories without children and products. Okay, let's back to our documentation. And let's put query in separate file. Queries and name it get category. We don't need flow here, so put it as no flow. And export const get categories. And an example, it looked like this. So just copy it and replace with our query. Okay, we have query. Now we can back to our hook. And we can use this snippet. Let's call it get categories. Get categories import from our queries file. Variables. Actually, let's replace our hard-coded category number with variable. So let's check again how it looks. We need to put query name and query params. Let's rename it get categories. Let's name variable ID and put ID here. And as ID, as variables, put ID and 2. Also, I think we can use error result as well. Then we can use effect hook to check our result. Okay. Each time data change, let's check if data and console log data. And also let's export get categories function at our result types. Get categories will be simply function return void, because we don't look what it return. And let's use it on the category screen. Use categories. It's actually require props. Let's add category ID string 2 as a params, and add category ID string here and use it in variable instead. So we will pass to our hook category ID Okay, and last thing we need to see the result, invoke our get categories. Let's do it on component mount. So use effect with get categories dependency and simply get categories. Okay, let's run our app, and also Flipper. Let's clear previous logs. Okay. App build it, launched, and I don't see any logs. Let's restart Flipper. And okay, iPhone 8 logs. Okay, Now we see the output, but we don't see any data. Right, so let's check. Maybe there is some errors. And we see network request error. Let's check our line GraphQL Magento config. Okay, yeah, it's flow is complaining about it. We have URL inside the Magento config object. So now we use correct URI and it should work. Let's reload. Yeah, now we see response. It's data category list and ID children's and name bottoms and like this. Okay, that's it. We will add some components for our output in the next video.